stopped at the gas station, and we got a call from my aunt that said, like, you're not going to be able to come home. Your road's flooded out again.
This is worse than Irene.
And then my dad hung up. My mom was like almost having a panic attack because it's happened like 3 times before. We got inside, we got our dogs and cat. Dad and my grandpa stayed and watched the house for a little bit to make sure nothing was going to happen to it. My dad, I know, doesn't really panic, like he doesn't like it. But then there's my mom, who's just, whenever it's raining, she's always getting nervous, like, oh God, I hope it doesn't flood again.
There used to be a house here.
Flooding could happen no matter what we do, but maybe we could take steps to ensure safety after the flooding.
Well, I think for folks to think that global warming doesn't exist is pretty ignorant, but I don't know if you want me to say that. Yeah, I would say that flooding is the biggest environmental issue. It seems to happen more frequently than anything else. We've narrowed it down to one spot in town now, and as you know, we've seen it flood at least 3 times in the last 10 years. So it's been a problem. We have had to relocate some people through, definitely by their choice, but that seems to be the way that we have to mitigate it, because the river's constantly changing. It's changing its course, changing its banks, and it needs an area to flood.
Well, a little scared, not a lot, but a little scared that, we may end up losing our home. The state didn't want to, or didn't appear to want to work with the families that live on Newton Road. They were more interested in wanting to buy us all out and have us all move away from the area instead of trying to fix the problem, which would have probably ended up being a cheaper solution in the long run.
One of the interesting things about flood-related issues in Vermont, and I believe since Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Irene, I believe Vermont has applied for disaster aid for flooding-related issues 12 times since then. One of the issues with flooding in a watershed, which is an area of land that all gathers into a single stream, is Vermont has 2 things. We have very low land that gathers up a lot of water, and we have very steep mountainous land in which the water sheds off from it quite quickly. It comes from natural storms. It comes from more water than usual being dropped on the ground. Strangely enough, drier than usual ground can help lead to more flooding, because the water in dry ground, it's kind of like a sponge. You really have to soak it for a while to get the water to go down in. So the ground isn't absorbing water when it's extra dry, so it stays above ground and runs downhill into a stream or river, and you get more water than usual. The same is true if the ground is already saturated, it's already holding all the water it can. Then the water stays above ground and causes flooding.
Building in a flood-prone area. Folks are seeing more now that that's not a great idea. So, I think moving forward, if teenagers are just aware of, what's around them and what's happening with these, more common flood events, that's probably a good thing to say. When you get out of college and you want to build your house, you might not want to build it next to a river. Even though it's scenic, you might not want to do that.
I think, to be honest with you, my #1 answer as to what teenagers or young people or students could do to prevent flooding would be to get an education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, construction, right? Some of those things you might see at Vermont Technical Center, or these schools where you learn about drainage, you learn about civil engineering, you learn about building things and developing things in flood zones, and we should try to have a better product in our communities than we do now. If the climate is changing as drastically as many scientists predict, that's a field of study that not only will be lucrative to students, but important to society.